Hello, everyone. As Tori said, my name is Jilton Jarrett, and I am a biologist here at Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge, where we are working to restore and conserve seabird colonies on the coast of Maine. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my favorite species of seabird that we have nesting here, the Leach's storm petrel. So first, I just want to introduce myself real quickly, since I haven't given a talk before. I started working for Maine Coastal back in April, but this isn't my first time here. I was actually an intern out on the islands for 3 summers a while back, and I also did an undergraduate research project with Maine Coastal Islands. So it's really great to be back. I'm happy to be here again. In the interim, I was doing some other seabird work in Alaska and the Galapagos, and I just completed my master's degree studying terns. So I always wanted to end up back here, so it's great to be here. All right, so now let's talk about storm petrels. So most of you are probably familiar with some of the other bird species that we nest in here on Maine, the infamous Atlantic puffin and the long distance traveler, the Arctic tern. But what about Leach's storm petrels? How many of you have been lucky enough to see one of these? And you can raise your hand in the chat if you feel so inclined. But I'm assuming that not many people have seen one before. And there's some good reasons for this. But storm petrels are actually one of the most widespread species of seabirds in the Northern Hemisphere, breeding both in the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. So on this map, locations of breeding colonies are highlighted in orange, which may be hard to see because the map might be small on your screens. And this big area in blue is the range during the non-breeding season. And if you look closely, you can see there's a concentrated breeding colonies in Atlantic Canada, with a little bit of nesting extending into Maine. But we are kind of at the southern limit in the Atlantic for their breeding grounds. And these maps are a little blurry, so I apologize for that. But published in 2019 gave us some amazing insight on the epic trips that Leach's storm petrels go on during the non-breeding season. So researchers up in New Brunswick put on some geolocator tags. They put them on the band. It's a tag that senses light levels, and then you can estimate a location from it. So here are 2 maps that they produced from this work. The first one's from the winters of 2012 and 2013, and the second one is from the winters of 2014 and 2015. And each color is an individual bird. But what these maps show is that Leach's storm petrels are moving across the Atlantic Ocean during the winter, as well as down into the southern hemisphere. And these are some crazy journeys for such a small bird. And it seems like Leach's storm petrels have low migratory connectivity, as you can see by how little these migration tracks overlap one another. This study also showed that storm petrels don't stay in one spot all winter. They can move around, probably following foraging hotspots. And once again, these are just some incredible journeys. So Leach's storm petrels belong to the tube-nose family of seabirds, which includes other species like albatrosses and shearwaters. The name tube-nose comes from this little tube-like structure located on their bill. Tube-nose seabirds are pelagic seabirds, meaning they spend most of their life in the open ocean. These birds don't have access to fresh water, so they have to drink salt water. And seabirds have a gland right below their eye that helps them filter out excess salt, and then that excess salt is drained through these tube structures on their bill. There's also some speculation that the tubes may help these birds with detecting airborne scents, which helps these birds find food in the featureless open ocean. Many members of the tube-nose family also have a distinct musky smell, which they can use to identify other individuals within their species. But to the human nose, I have heard people describe Leach's storm petrels as smelling like patchouli. So Leach's storm petrels are the only species of storm petrel that breeds in Maine. But if you're out on a boat off our coast in the summer and you see a storm petrel, it's most likely a Wilson storm petrel, not a Leach's. So Wilson storm petrels breed in the southern hemisphere during our winter season, and spends its non-breeding season up in the North Atlantic. So at first glance, they may appear to be difficult to tell apart, but there are really some key things to look for. So Leach's Storm-Petrels have a forked tail, while Wilson's have a more square tail. Leach's Storm-Petrels also have longer, more narrow wings, and Wilson's Storm-Petrels have shorter, stubbier wings. I've also heard that Wilson's Storm-Petrels, have yellow webbing between their toes, but I've never seen this. Maybe some of you have in the field. They never seem to be still enough to make that close of an observation. One of the reasons that you are unlikely to see a Leach's Storm-Petrel during the day is that during the breeding season, Leach's Storm-Petrels are nocturnal at their nesting colonies. And in fact, Storm-Petrel nocturnal activity levels are related to the moon phase. So Storm-Petrels are less active during new moons. And the weather also plays a role in this, obviously. There's lots of cloud cover on bright moon nights, then that could increase activity. So long story short, the darker the night, the better for Leach's Storm-Petrels. And this is an adaptation to avoid avian predators, such as raptors and gulls, from killing adult Storm-Petrels when they're going to and from their burrows. So here's a picture of a herring gull eating a Leach's Storm-Petrel. And you can see there's a big size difference between the Storm-Petrel and the gull. And it's better just to avoid these predators than to have to deal with them. Another way that Storm-Petrels avoid predators at nesting colony by nesting in burrow, like some of our other seabirds in here, such as puffins. A little bit more flexible when it comes to their burrow location and the substrate of that burrow. For example, on Matinic Island, there are Storm-Petrels nesting in an old rock wall, which is located in an open meadow. And there's also some Storm-Petrels nesting in the forested end of the island amongst the tree roots and the ferns. We have also found Storm-Petrels nesting under pieces of plywood, logs, even under tent platforms and building structures on the islands. So in this picture is an example of a sod burrow. And unless you are looking for it, it's not very obvious. Things to look for are fresh digging at the entrance at the beginning of the season, especially cleaning out their burrow. And if there's vegetation growing up through the entrance hole, that probably means it's also not active. Smelling the burrow is also a good indicator. Often active burrows smell strongly of Storm-Petrel, which is that musky patchouli scent that I mentioned earlier. Storm-Petrels show some site fidelity, which means they return to the same burrow to breed year after year. We think that site fidelity leads to mate fidelity, with the longest known pair bond being 22 years long at a pair at Kent Island up in New Brunswick. However, the average pair bond is about 3 years because, sometimes things just don't work out. Storm-Petrels often find a new partner after a failed breeding attempt, a major disturbance to their burrow, or the death of one of their mate. So this is a long-lived species, and the oldest Storm-Petrel on record was at least 36 years old. So here is a fun picture of an area with a high density of Leach's Storm-Petrel burrows out on Matinicus Rock. It doesn't look like plants, but if carefully, you can see the little orange colored stakes that mark individual burrow entrances. So I went through and I circled them all for you. And in just this one shot, I found 41, though I'm sure I missed some. So this is just an example of how densely cluttered Storm-Petrels. So let's shift gears a little bit. And so Storm-Petrels feed by hovering and walking, if you will, on the surface of the water, as seen in this photo, while they pluck their prey from the surface. So their prey species include species of zooplankton and nekton. And if you're unfamiliar with those terms, zooplankton are small organisms that feed on phytoplankton that drift in the ocean current, such as copepods and krill. Nekton, on the other hand, are animals in the water column that are able to swim against the currents, such as small fish and squid. Past research on Leach's Storm-Petrel diet indicated that myctophid fish, which is this fish that's shown first in the imagery, are important prey items for Leach's storm petrels. So myctophids are really neat. They undergo a diurnal migration, which means that during the day, these fish are deep in the water column, where they're safe from surface feeding predators like seabirds. However, at night, they migrate vertically to the surface up through the water column to feed. And that's when they become available to predators such as Leach's storm petrels. Another trait related to their nocturnal lifestyle is how vocal storm petrels are. During the day, most people would never know they were standing in a Leach's storm petrel colony unless someone told them. But at night, Leach's storm petrels are quite chatty within their burrows and when in the air, and their calls are pretty distinct. Their two most common vocalizations are the chatter call and the purr call. And this image you're seeing on your screen is a spectrogram, which is a visualization of sound. So this purr call and bracket is a chatter call. And then this little blue bracket is showing where you can hear a bird taking in a breath before it starts another purr call again. So I'm going to try to play this clip for you so you can hear it. It worked when we tested it, but we'll see. All right, so I hope everybody was able to hear that because it's quite a fun noise. And often this purr and chatter call is given in duet form by a pair within their burrow. So storm petrels only lay one egg per clutch. And here you can see how large the egg is compared to the adult storm petrel. Typically the eggs are all white, but some can have speckling. On average, it takes around 43 days of incubation before the chick hatches, and both parents take turn incubating the egg. Unlike many other seabird species where the parents switch incubation duties multiple times during one day, storm petrel incubation shifts are usually around 2.5 days long, where one's in the burrow and the other one is out at sea foraging. And we'll talk a little bit more about where storm petrels go to feed a little bit later in this presentation. So here is a picture of the storm petrel chick. They're small and fluffy when they hatch. Chicks cannot fully regulate on their own until they are 5 days old, maintain their body temperature between 41 and 59 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a pretty cool temperature. And this adaptation allows for chicks to survive cool burrow temperatures, especially early in the season, and to be able to tolerate being left alone in the burrow most of the time while the parents are out sea foraging for themselves. Chicks get fed by one of the parents about once every 2 days, though this rate is more frequent when chicks are younger and becomes longer as the chicks age. When chicks undergo longer periods of time without being fed, they enter a torpid state, which allows them to really slow their metabolism down to survive that fasting period. And during this, they don't look like they are doing very well. So for example, this picture on the left is a chick that I pulled out of a burrow on Matinicus Rock in mid-October. And the chick looked like it was half dead, but really it was probably just in an energy-saving state waiting for its next meal. This is a common occurrence, and these chicks do bounce back once given a proper meal. And this chick has a little bit of down left, and it's looking like it's about ready to fledge from the burrow and head out to sea. Storm petrel chicks will actually weigh 1.5 times the weight of an adult for a period of time before losing that weight to fledge. And it usually takes about 9 to 10 weeks for a chick to be ready to leave the burrow to head out to sea. So like this bird that I pulled out of a burrow on Matinicus Rock, storm petrel chicks will be in burrows until October in Maine, which is later than most of our other seabirds have. All right, so now let's talk about why we should care about Leach's storm petrels, despite the fact that they're just really neat birds. It's thought that the population has been decreasing in recent years, which led to the IUCN to change the global status of Leach's storm petrels to vulnerable in 2016, stating that though there are regions where the population trend of this species is unknown, data from monitored populations indicate that there has been a population decline of at least 30% over the past 39 years, which is about 3 generations of Leach's storm-petrels. In Atlantic Canada, the largest colonies in the region have had dramatic declines in the number of nesting storm-petrels, and these colonies are globally significant. The population here in Maine is much smaller than the Canadian population and has been less intensely monitored, but we're working to change that along with some of our collaborators. As with other seabirds in the Gulf of Maine, one of our major concerns is how this species will adapt to changing prey resources as the Gulf of Maine continues to rapidly warm. A better understanding of what prey resources storm-petrels rely on and how these species are responding to climate change is needed. Leach's storm-petrels do show some attraction to light, which has been problematic in Atlantic Canada, where petrels fly into lights on offshore drilling platforms in large numbers. And there is concern that offshore wind turbines could cause similar issues. Predation is an issue at some colonies as well. Escaped farm-raised mink in Canada are an issue at certain colonies. Storm-petrels have been known to ingest plastic pollution, which can cause a multitude of health problems in both adults and chicks. And hopefully increased monitoring and studying of Leach's storm-petrels will help us define other drivers of population decline and work towards restoring the population. So what are we doing at Maine coastal islands to help this species? There's 35 documented Leach's storm-petrel colonies in the Gulf of Maine, 12 of which are owned by the refuge. I've labeled the location of our offices in Rockland and Millbridge as a spatial reference. And these yellow circles show the 5 largest storm-petrel colonies on refuge-owned islands. The largest colonies, storm-petrel colonies in Maine, are not owned by the refuge, and these colonies are located on Great Duck and Little Duck Islands. And I've denoted these with a little triangle shape. They're right next to each other. So here on the slide, I've listed the estimated number of breeding pairs for each of the islands labeled on the map. We're hoping to be able to census our storm-petrels again in the near future to see how these numbers have changed. On 4 out of 5 of the refuge-owned islands labeled here, we have researchers stationed during the summer, allowing us to do some more intensive monitoring of storm-petrel burrows throughout the breeding season. So early in the season, island researchers find active burrows before the vegetation grows up, which can make it hard to find the entrances to these burrows. So burrows are marked as active if there is evidence of fresh digging within the burrow or if there's an adult storm-petrel found within the burrow. Storm-petrel occupancy is challenging to determine since the entrances to most burrows are too small for most people to get their hand in. And even if you can get your hand in the burrow, often the burrows are long with twists in directions that doesn't really work for a human arm. To overcome this issue, we have burrow scopes, which are a camera attached to a bendy pole that can fit down in the burrow and show us the burrow contents on the screen. So here are 2 images from scoping a burrow. You can see the adult bird in the middle picture looking back at the little burrow scope camera. And the picture on the far right shows an adult that is sitting on a chick, which is what is circled in red, though I know it's kind of hard to see. But you can see that the chick is standing on the remains of an eggshell. So it's probably like a day-old chick in there, which is pretty neat. Occasionally, we also use playback of Leach's storm-petrel calls at the burrows to determine occupancy. So if you play a storm-petrel call by the burrow, they'll call back at it. And that's another way to determine occupancy without sticking your arm in there. So we try to monitor a subset of burrows throughout the season to determine successful laying and hatching, though fledging is harder to monitor since our researchers leave the islands before a majority of the storm-petrel chicks are ready to fledge. So this past season, we used mist nets to capture adult storm-petrels on Petite Manane Island. We're planning a marker capture population study on this island, so we're trying to get as many bands out on birds as possible. Here in this picture on the left, you can see the mist nets that we used. So here you can see that the net is rolled up in the middle. It's that black line. But at night, when we're ready to capture storm petrels, the net is unfurled and stretched from the top of the pole down to a couple feet below the ground. And then we just wait for the petrels to fly into the net, and then we can take them out. Most of the storm petrels we caught were banded, but our first storm petrel recaptured with the band was a storm petrel I had actually banded on Petite Manan as an intern back in 2016, which I was very excited about. We also caught a storm petrel which had been banded earlier in the summer, way down on Matinicus Rock, which was very interesting, especially since we talked about site fidelity. So maybe this was a pre-breeding bird trying to decide if it wanted to relocate, who knows? But I'm looking forward to getting back out mist netting more again this upcoming season. While we were mist netting and handling birds, we also collected some fecal samples, and we submitted these samples to our collaborator at Cornell University, who was going to use fecal DNA analysis to get the species from feces. So she's going to be able to give us information on what the storm petrels are eating by extracting and identifying the DNA of prey items from storm petrel poop. We're hoping that this can be a non-invasive way to monitor Leach's storm petrel diet in the face of a drastically changing marine ecosystem here in the Gulf of Maine. We don't have any of the results from this project yet, but hopefully soon. This method's also being used for other seabirds, including puffins and terns. So this past summer, we also were involved with the Leach's storm petrel tagging project. Keenan Yakola, a PhD student at Oregon State University, is studying the foraging ecology of storm petrels in the Gulf of Maine as part of his dissertation research. And Linda Welch, the supervisory biologist here at the refuge, who is also a seabird tagging expert, helped train him on the methods for attaching these tiny tags to storm petrels. So these tags, which you can see in the picture on the right, weigh only about 0.95 grams, so about the weight of a paperclip, and are attached to the storm petrel's back. Because of the small size of these tags, they have to be recovered to download the data. Unfortunately, there's no remote download like in some of the larger tags that we are using. So in the picture on the left, you can see Linda and Keenan affixing a tag to a storm petrel out on Matinicus Rock. And he also deployed some tags on Eastern Egg Rock, an island owned and managed by Audubon. So I have a couple maps from this summer to share with you from his work. So this map shows some examples of what Keenan referred to as typical multi-day foraging routes of storm petrels from Matinicus Rock and Eastern Egg Rock during the summer of 2022. These birds were flying all the way down to an area off the Cape just to feed. And this area in yellow is the Gulf of Maine offshore wind planning area. And you can see that the storm petrels spent a majority of their transit time within this polygon. And here are some examples of the longer foraging trips made by tagged storm petrels this past summer. As you can see, these birds went out past Georges Bank during their multi-day foraging trips. Some of the tagged birds spent time foraging in the Northeast Seamounts and Canyons Marine National Monument, which is more than 250 miles from these colonies. The longest foraging trip by a storm petrel was over 1,200 miles in 4 days, which is a pretty impressive trip. Hopefully in a few years, when Keenan is wrapping up his PhD, we can bring him in to talk about his findings in more detail. And we're also hoping that this data set can be used to better inform the location of future offshore and wind energy development. Similarly, we worked with a master student back in 2019 to tag some storm petrels nesting on Petite Manan Island and Matinic Island. Unfortunately, they were only able to get track information back from 5 storm petrels, and this quick map here is just showing all of the foraging track data that they were able to collect. So once again, in general, storm petrels were headed down to Georges Bank to feed. Currently, relating this project and Keenan's project, we don't have enough information to know if storm petrels feed in similar locations from year to year, or if nesting location determines where storm petrels are going. Prey resources in the ocean are naturally ephemeral, and we hope that continuing tagging studies across years and including more locations will improve our understanding of what foraging grounds are the most important for storm petrels in the Gulf of Maine. So also this student did a little work with acoustic monitoring. I know this figure is busy, but just look at the center blue line, which represents the calling rate of storm petrels at night. What this figure shows is that the calling rate decreases as the moon phase approaches full. As we discussed earlier, storm petrels don't like it to be bright out at night. And they also tested this for forest and open habitats and found similar trends. Though acoustic monitoring hasn't been routinely used here in Maine, I did want to talk about it briefly because it can be a really good tool for cryptic species. And it is often one of the main survey tools for other storm petrel species. Since acoustic units can be left at sites all summer, they can be used to eavesdrop on the colonies during the breeding season without anyone else having to be there. And that's great when we're limited logistically to how many islands we can survey and where we can put people. Though getting a true count of individuals isn't feasible with acoustic monitoring, it can give you an index of storm petrel abundance in an area around an acoustic recorder. So this could be a good tool for us to use in the future to at least monitor occupancy at some of our smaller, more remote colonies. And one more project we're hoping to try out this upcoming field season is building artificial burrows for Leach's storm petrels. As I mentioned previously, accessing storm petrel burrows to determine nest fate can be a real challenge. We're hoping that if we provide artificial burrows for them, this will make monitoring productivity easier for both ourselves and the storm petrels, since it should be less stressful to get the birds out of the burrow this way. So here's just a quick diagram of a design for an artificial burrow that other researchers have used for other species. I'm not sure if we'll get this fancy with ours, since often we find storm petrels just under random pieces of plywood, but we'll see what we come up with and we'll see what the storm petrels like best. So in conclusion, the Leach's storm petrel is in need of conservation action in light of recent global declines in its population. Due to the difficulty of studying and monitoring this species, it has been left behind compared to some of the easier to observe species that it nests alongside. But just because it's less visible doesn't make it any less worthy of protection. Fortunately, this species has been getting some more attention, and various agencies and organizations from multiple countries are working together to better monitor and manage Leach's storm petrels. And here at the refuge, we're working to increase our understanding of how Leach's storm petrels are doing on our islands and contributing to that larger effort as best we can. So hopefully this will lead to a brighter future for the Leach's storm petrel. So thank you all for attending this evening and the Friends for hosting. I'm sorry if I was cutting out. I don't have the greatest internet, but I should have plenty of time for questions. So thank you. All right, I see a question from Zach. Are there any sat tag studies that suggest leaches are having to travel farther offshore to find prey due to climate change? As far as I know, I think there's just not enough work has been done. I think we're just kind of entering the tagging world of storm petrels because they're so small, and getting a tag that's small enough to put on these birds. And maybe in other places they've done work with this, but not that I'm aware. Let me see if I can find some other questions. Feel free to jump in and say something if you have a question too.
There was another question from Barbara Snap asking, what is the nesting success of the bird?
That is a great question. I'm not sure of the values off the top of my head. We didn't do a straightforward productivity assessment this year. So I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I could get that to you, Barbara.
Could you maybe just give a general overall, like, are they doing pretty good, not so good?
Yeah, And it's just hard to say, and that's just how it is for Storm-Petrels. Especially with when our interns leave, it's hard for us to get back out to see which birds have fledged, and this fall was really hard because of the weather. So when our interns left, like Petite Manan, for example, in early August, most of the Storm-Petrels that made it to that point were still in their burrows. And I don't think we got back out to Petite Manan until I think it was early November, and by then it was too late to see who fledged and who didn't, because they all should have been gone by then. So that's one issue that we are running into. It seems like if they get to the hatching phase, they have a pretty good chance of survival. We don't find very many dead chicks in burrows, at least that's not what we observed this year. Caitlin, who was on Matinic Island this summer, just led a comment that I'm going to read. So she said, she was the crew lead out there. On Matinic this year, most of the nests they monitored had eggs around 2025 and had hatched by the time they had left in July. So it's a timing issue a lot of the time for monitoring them. So we're working around protocols that can improve our understanding of them. All right, here's a question from Sarah. Are you able to study them on great duck and little duck? If so, do you need volunteers on teams on these islands to help gather data? So little duck is, I believe, managed by the National Audubon Society, and great duck, that colony is monitored by the College of the Atlantic. So the Fish and Wildlife Service is not, we have no management authority over those colonies. I think we all want to get out there and see what's going on, but that would be up to COA and College of the Atlantic and Audubon to get out to census those islands again. We have helped with it in the past, but that's out of our jurisdiction. All right, I see another message here that, is there a notable difference in the bird tones? So there is some sexual dimorphism in Leach's Storm-Petrel vocalizations. And if I remember it correctly, that when the birds are duetting, the one that's slightly higher pitched is the male and the lower is female. I could have that backwards off the top of my head, but it's really hard to tell. Another question from Zach. Are there any temporal changes in nesting? Not that I'm aware. If you're talking about phenology shifts, probably based because of climate change. At least not in the colonies that we manage have we observed any shifts in like lay dates or fledge dates. What concern is there about climate affecting the birds? I mean, there's a lot. In the Gulf of Maine, especially with the water in the Gulf of Maine warming at such a higher rate than anywhere else in the world, basically, it's like in the 99th percentile for warming. There's a lot of concerns about shifts in the prey base for birds, shifting to more warm water species, which tend to be less rich in nutrients and lipids that cold water species tend to have higher densities of. And that's a big issue. And we're seeing some prey switches in other seabirds potentially. But we don't know how that's going to affect Storm-Petrels. So that's why we're trying to gather data on diet with the fecal DNA analysis and monitoring foraging tracks across seasons with different because each year there's different sea surface temperatures and other weather events. So we're just trying to get more data so we can try to synthesize what's going on in the system. Corey asks, is there anything we can do as concerned citizens to support petrels and their conservation? Yeah. you can get out there and, advocate for legislation that helps conservation. You can volunteer with the refuge or donate to the refuge, whatever your ability is in that realm. Yeah, Tori's probably a good resource to answer that question too. So Tori, if I missed anything, feel free to jump in and say something.
You read my mind.
All right, someone else asks, is Canada also studying their feeding resources and monitoring their nesting success? Yes, Canada has a lot of data. They have some big colonies that they have long-term data sets for. So they know, they have a better idea of what's going on at their colonies than we do, just because of the scale of their colonies. They're just so huge and large that there's a lot of accessible nests to monitor. And that's an issue that we have where we just can't get in burrows to monitor them. And Canada is also doing some tracking, as you saw, the non-breeding season maps, those were Canadians. Yes, yeah, I feel like there's more literature for the Canadian population of petrels than the main population, just because there's more. There's a lot more. I think their largest colony in Canada is Bacalao Island, and it's got 2 million pairs of petrels on it. So it's a big colony. Could you discuss or speculate on the causes for the 30% population decline, more issues beyond climate? Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. There's lots of things going on. There was introduced predators to some islands, some non-native species, like the farm-raised mink. There were rats. Rats are really bad for seabird nesting islands. I mean, that's why seabirds tend to nest on offshore islands, is to distance themselves from land-based predators like that. And rat-free islands are good, and when there's rats, they can decimate islands. So that's been an issue places. And the Pacific with seabirds, and the Atlantic too. Shifts in gull populations, with them being subsidized from fishing practices and human waste. That can be an issue too. The plastic pollution, contaminants, storm-petrels, always when you test them for different contaminants, seem to have a lot. Yeah, so there's a lot going on, and I know I've missed some in the list of why the population may be declining. There's not like, it's not that we know this has caused this percentage of decline. We know there's a decline, and we have things that we think are contributing to the decline. Do any of their burrows get invaded by other species? Not really. Their burrows are so small that a puffin, a guillemot couldn't get down in those burrows to use them. I've seen salamanders in the storm-petrel burrows on some islands, but that doesn't really matter. I don't think they care about that at all. Caitlin's got a good question. Are they going to try to research further the role of snakes may play on the Martinic population? So on Martinic Island, there are garter snakes, and we're not sure how much damage they're doing to the Leach's storm-petrel colony. But we're going to test out some snake traps this season that have a remote camera in them that can detect if what's in the trap is a snake or not a snake. So if it's a snake, it'll keep it trapped so we can go and remove it from the island and take it to the mainland. And if it's like a tern chick that's using the trap to hide in, it'll stay open so it can go. And I would like to do some snake diet studies to see if we can tell with stable isotopes or the fecal DNA, what percentage of the diet is Leach's storm-petrel eggs or tern chicks. So hopefully, yes, Caitlin, I would like to do that. Do they, okay, here's a question. Who's doing the artificial burrow nest intervention, and can we consider undertaking on Maine coastal island sites? So yeah, so I think that's just going to be us. We're going to put out a few artificial burrows on Petite Manane and Martinic and see if they come and use them. It might take a couple years because it doesn't seem like there's a lack of nesting site availability. It seems like there's just not enough petrels to fill the available nesting habitat. So we're going to have to convince them to use those artificial burrows, I think. So we'll have to make them good. But it would make monitoring them easier, especially like Matinic. In the petrels nesting in the stone wall, you can't find them. It's pretty much impossible to locate the birds in the stone wall, though you can hear them. But if we could build an artificial burrow into the stone wall, then they're contained and we could monitor productivity for those birds. So that's kind of our plan. It's just a little side project that we're hoping will help us monitor productivity better. And I guess that kind of relates to the question about, do they prefer forested places like Great Duck? So I think it's, once again, there's just not enough petrels to fill the available habitat, and they are a colonial nesting seabird. So if there are a lot of storm petrels already on Great Duck, it's more likely that birds will recruit back to Great Duck because they have that site fidelity. And also, if you're looking for a new place to nest, you're going to go where there's a lot of other birds as a colonial nester. So I don't know if they prefer forested areas over not. I would say that we probably don't know, since everywhere they tend to choose forested or open. They seem to be pretty flexible. Okay, here's another question I didn't see. For tour boats going by refuge islands, what would be the important message for the petrels versus the megafauna, or the megafauna of puffins? Okay, the charismatic bird that everybody knows about. I think just telling people that they're there. I think they don't appeal to the general public, maybe because they're not as charismatic as an Atlantic puffin is. But I think talking about how the crazy foraging trips they go on, that they go to Africa during the non-breeding season, you know, maybe describing their call. People have described Leach's Storm-Petrels as sounding like gremlins or something. I don't know. There's a way to make them charismatic, I think. I'm not sure the best way to answer that question because I am biased and I think Storm-Petrels are fascinating. So maybe someone else might have a better way to sell Storm-Petrels to a crowd like a tour boat. Tori is making a good point in the chat that there is a technician. The technicians out on the islands write a blog every summer about their experiences. So when we put crews back out in May, keep an eye out for updates to the blog. They're often very good writers and take very good pictures and are very entertaining for those of us stuck on the mainland all summer. Question from Barbara: does the presence of gulls influence choice of nesting habitat? Avoid the open areas? I would imagine so, yes. Because you're not, if you're a storm petrel, you're not going to want to walk by an area where gulls are nesting. So I would say yes. I haven't observed it, mainly because, well, maybe because we're not really seeing storm petrels nesting in the gull colonies that I've been in. And I'm thinking of Petit Manan, where there are some laughing gulls nesting, but also the vegetation isn't right. So I would say they probably are, because that is a big predator of them. But sometimes just the habitat choice doesn't work for them as well. The gulls like that thicker vegetation.
All right, everybody. I think we'll wrap it up there for the night. If you think of any other questions at any point, feel free to email me. Again, it's Tori_Tibbets@maincoastislands.org. I would be happy to pass along any questions anyone has to Jill, and I know she would be happy to answer anything that you guys can think of. Thank you guys all so much for coming, and be sure to leave Jill a little thank you. We're really excited that she got to be our first presenter of the new year. And we're looking forward to many more talks this year.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming. I hope everybody has a great rest of their evening.